What is the LGA? What does it do? And how important is it to the Lib Dems? Welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. Hello, thank you for tuning in. My name is John Potter. We're here with another episode of the Lib Dem Podcast. And today we're talking about the Local Government Association, or the LGA. It's vitally important to the workings of so much of local democracy, yet I imagine most of our listeners probably have no idea what it does, what benefit it brings to councillors. And so we're here to inform you and let you know everything that you need to know about the LGA. And so not only have I brought Richard Kemp with me from Liverpool, who has been involved with the LGA for many a decade. Hello, Richard.
Hi, nice to be back on.
But we've got two, we couldn't get better guests. I couldn't have wished for better guests. We have the new leadership of the Lib Dem group of the LGA. We have Joe Harris from Cotswold. Hi, Joe. Welcome to the podcast again.
Great to see you and great to be back on.
Thank you very much. And first time attendee on the podcast, we have Bridget Smith, who is the leader of South Cambs Liberal Democrats and is the deputy leader of the Lib Dems on the LGA. Welcome, Bridget.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
You are absolutely welcome. So, Joe, we might as well start with you. What is the LGA?
Well, it's a really good question. And I think actually it's one of the reasons I decided to put myself forward for the leadership of the Lib Dem group at the LGA. It's because we've got loads and loads of fantastic councillors and they don't know what the LGA does, what it is, and what it's capable of doing in terms of helping them and informing national policy and debate. So in a nutshell, the way I said it to people is the LGA is a bit like the professional association or perhaps a union for local government. So the vast majority of councils up and down the land are members, so they make up the membership, and then of course through the political groups, because it's a politically led organisation, we appoint roles within our own group, all the Lib Dem councillors, and then members of the Lib Dem team then go on to sit on the various boards that the LGA has, and obviously make up the senior leadership of the LGA. So yeah, it's a politically led organisation. It's a cross-party organisation. So while of course we sit in our political groups, there's a lot of cross-party working. And I think Bridget and I were saying the other day, actually that's quite nice actually, because we know we know how polarised politics is at the minute and can be, and actually it's an opportunity for all of us, Liberal Democrat councillors, Labour, Conservative, to get together, to chew the fat on a host of issues and try and lobby for improvements. That's not to say there aren't disagreements, of course there are, but on the whole, the LGA comes together and we lobby for best practice and for a better deal for local government. Does that sum it up all right?
I think that was fine. Okay, I think we can go home. No, that's great. No, Bridget, you obviously have been leader for some time at South Cambs. So how important has the LGA to you as a leader and as a councillor? And what's the day-to-day for the leadership, you and Joe's roles like with the LGA?
If I tell you about my introduction to the LGA, it was on the minute that the final count was being read out in May 2018, which showed that we'd had a landslide victory in South Cambridgeshire. And my phone started ringing just as it was the final moments, the victory moment. And it was Sarah Butikoffer, who helps lead on all the peer mentors, on the phone going, "Oh my God, Bridget, right, we've got things lined up for you. We've got mentors lined up for you. We've got training lined up." And I was going, Sarah, you'll just have to hang on a moment. So I then rang her back fairly soon after that, once we'd kind of drawn our breath. And, within minutes, I had a mentor assigned to me. And in fact, I think I ended up with about 4, all of whom I have used. I still use Keith House was my initial mentor, but I use Sarah. Alan Connett supports me. Keith House has always been on the end of the phone for me 24/7. So there was those people kind of holding my hand as I was thrown into a completely new role and change of control for a council, which isn't just a big issue for the politicians, it's a big issue for officers as well to cope with. Then they sent me on leadership academies and leadership courses. Members of the cabinet went on finance training. We all, I think every member of the cabinet had a mentor as well. So masses of training. They came and ran sessions for my group, and they keep on running sessions for the group. They've just been there holding our hands every minute of the day, and we have been far better for it. So whenever I talk to people who've been thrown into the situation, I say your first call has to be to the Lib Dem office at the LGA, because they are the people who will make it easy for you.
Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Pray to Reigns. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Pray to Reigns have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Pray to Reigns are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Pray to Reigns website at praytoreigns.co.uk/liberal-democrats. And I suppose, Richard, you've been involved with the LJ for some time, and it's that just having that backup behind you. You know, we have things like the ALDC that are there for the campaigning kind of backup. The LGA is there kind of to help you once you get elected. And whether that you are a single councillor on your own, which can be daunting, or you suddenly, we've had interviews with people like Amanda Hopgood, etc., who are suddenly thrown into very interesting situations where you're having to do all sorts of deals and negotiations and take over. And Amanda Hopgood in Durham, if you haven't listened to that episode, I recommend you do, because that is, unbelievable. First change in Labour for over 100 years, first female leader of Durham. It was just a huge switch. And so the LGA is vital for that kind of transition.
Yeah, helping Lib Dem groups is a very important part of our work from the Lib Dem office, that is. And in fact, if you look, we're better at supporting our councillors, and our councillors are better at going for training and mentoring than the other three political groups at the LGA. So we should be proud of what the LGA group does, but we should also be proud of what our councillors do, because by and large, Lib Dem councillors don't just want to be there, because if they did, they would have found an easier way to do it. They want to be the best council. They want to be the best councillor. They want to be the best ward councillor, the best cabinet member, for whatever it is. They want to do it properly. And on Saturday, I was with Amanda Hopgood in Durham. I'm her mentor. Very difficult circumstances there. Where, of course, there are four parties in a partnership, and the Lib Dems aren't even the biggest of them. But they're powering the agenda, partly because of the support we've been able to put in behind some very impressive councillors like Amanda. You then look at the other two functions of the LGA. And one of the problems that the LGA always has, and it's the point in a way that Joe was making, is you can't always tell people what you've done or what you're doing, because you work with the other parties, and we do try and work together. 95% of what we do, we agree on. Why then do we argue, as we do in our council chambers, to be honest, about 5%? And if I were to tell you some of the meetings I've had with ministers, and that Joe and Bridget will have now, that have changed things, well, I wouldn't get into another ministerial meeting, and neither would the LGA. So you can't always proudly say we've done this and put it on the equivalent of a focus. And then the other
Richard,
thing,
could I just come in there, because that's actually a really good point. I want to kind of dig in with Joe and Bridget, with the fact that, I would say as a councillor, as a leader of a group, I've used the LGA. We've got fortnightly meetings now, which have been fantastic. But I would say, and this is no disrespect to anyone who's come before, that a lot of people have no idea what it does. And a lot of councillors have no idea what they could access, what it was doing for them. So, Joe, I know you ran on a kind of a fresh face, kind of a more proactive LJ group. Is that something that you think we must improve upon?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're right. I don't think it's anybody's fault. I just think sometimes, it's a case of reviewing what we're doing. Are we cutting through? Are we getting through to the people that we really need to? We've got a a big focus of mine is on the communications, the internal communications. How do we speak to, the councillors that perhaps, okay, they see the weekly email we put out, but for some reason they don't read it, or they just decide not to. They just decide to stick it in the bin. So, we're having a session on Friday, Bridget and I, with Alan Connett and with Heather Kidd, our other members of the leadership team, really looking at how we can, get the Lib Dem office, better at communications. Can we get a targeted action plan together, a bit of a content plan? How are we going to speak to people, and how are we going to do it in different ways? We know through our election campaigns, don't we? It's all about communication. The more we communicate with our residents, the more we demonstrate what we're doing, demonstrate best practice, the more likely they are to have heard of us and then subsequently to vote for us. So if we want people engaged, we absolutely have to improve communication.
Yeah. Richard, I'll let you finish your second point now.
Well, the second point was then policy formulation. So all our spokespersons put a lot of time in behind the scenes in producing what comes out as an LGA policy statement. And frankly, because our people inside the LGA work harder as well, you look at the policy briefs and say, isn't that a Lib Dem policy? And often it is. But then if we were to go, and Joe waves his hand and say, oh, well, actually, it's all Lib Dem policy, look what we've done. Again, our influence would decrease. So it's a very difficult balance that Joe and Bridget has to claiming the credit for things that we rightly should, but not doing it a way that makes sure that our people coming behind us won't be able to get in. So it's support, it's policy promotion, and it's lobbying are the three functions of the LGA.
I'm Bridget. So I'm very conscious. Obviously, we're all local councillors in various forms across the country. How important is the LGA to the function of local government? How much does it improve it? I mean, personally, it's been invaluable to me as a person. I was on like the Next Generation program, which is something when I first got elected, the LGA paid for me to go to Lib Dem areas to see what Lib Dems were doing. You talked about Keith House down in Eastleigh. I was sent down to Eastleigh to experience it and things like that. So how important is the LGA? Because local government's under threat. I don't think there's no way of disguising it. Local government is in a really tricky position at the moment. All this talk about social care that's in the news, there's still no plan to how that's going to be solved and how local authorities are supposed to deal with that. So how important is your role in making sure we are united as well?
So I think it's vitally important. So, I mean, the reality is that, Joe or I, we're not going to get in front of Conservative ministers by ourselves. We're not going to be sat over a desk for them. But the representatives from the LGA are going to sit in a room with cabinet ministers, and it's those conversations that we are feeding into behind the scenes. And as Richard has said, because we as Liberal Democrats, we are heavily involved in the LGA, and very, very often, I mean, more often than not, it's the stuff that we are banging on about that actually makes it through to the end product. And that is what the LGA, either through its officers or through the chairs of the different boards and so on, actually take before ministers. So, it's very frustrating that, we can't take all the credit for that all of the time. But really, it's our only way of speaking directly to cabinet members, to ministers, to the policymakers. So I cannot say strongly enough how important it is. And without the LGA, people like Joe and I, even though we're running really exciting councils, nobody would hear us, quite honestly, outside our own areas.
So, but Joe, is there a difference now with this government? I mean, I'm talking in particular about planning reform, etc. Where, I thought the planning reforms would never happen because I just assumed there'd be a groundswell of dislike among Tory areas. So I thought, well, the Tories don't mind if they annoy us. They don't mind if they annoy Labour, but they tend to listen when their own side get very annoyed with stuff. But that seems to have not changed. So they're still pressing ahead with those. Okay, they've modified it slightly so southern areas are less badly hit. But does that mean, is this government and its populist kind of stance mean that the LGA is diminishing in the eyes of this particular government?
Potentially. I think what the current situation highlights is that, when you've got a government with a massive majority who are very arrogant and feel they can get away with everything, they can, to a certain extent, ride roughshod over people's views. So in that respect, maybe has been a bit of a diminishing role. I think what the LGA really succeeds at, though, is lobbying ministers, but also the civil servants who actually do a lot of the groundwork on the policy, and a lot of the detail, which quite often is the most important part. You get the big headlines, of course, on policy, but it's those it's the more granular stuff that the civil servants work on. So the LGA are very good at affecting that level of detail. You've mentioned a couple of issues there. You've mentioned planning reforms. We've mentioned social care, which I know you're going to be talking about. These are huge, big issues, and I think particularly on social care that we're talking about today. Well, actually, the government have to listen to us, because it's local government that's going to be having to carry out and oversee a lot of the social care reform. So they don't listen to us at our peril, actually. So there is engagement, but you're right. Whether or not they're listening to us, enough, I don't know. But I think it's open for a big discussion, I think.
Richard, has it always been the case that local government is kind of little bit kind of put down by the national government, or am I just being too critical of the current administration?
Well, it's certainly got worse, but the LGA was formed in 1997 when there were three organisations, one for county councils, one for district councils, and one for metropolitan authorities. And we came together because we just knew at the time that would give us more influence. And the most fruitful period that I've been involved in is actually when John Prescott was the Deputy Prime Minister and head of the Office of the Deputy Prime Minister, which actually includes most of MHCLG. Yes, just checking I got that right. The initials keep changing, the boring stays the same. And then we used to have for every 6 months a central local partnership. John Prescott would chair one side and the chair of the LGA would chair the other, and the appropriate Secretary of State would be wheeled in whether or not he wanted to come, and it was the LGA together. But my prediction is that within a year, Joe and Bridget and some of the new team coming in will be meeting on a regular basis, more ministers than our parliamentarians, except they will meet them, of course, across the chamber, but actually meeting them. And they won't just do it in formal places. For example, for some reason, I spent 6 years as the LGA spokesman on loneliness and suicide. I think it must be because I was appointed just after the coalition ended. So I think every Liberal Democrat was feeling lonely and suicidal. But I would meet regularly the Public Health Minister, the Care Minister, this Minister and that Minister, like this or on a Zoom. So yes, most of the work now is done Tory to Tory. They talk most to each other. But if that Tory is 95% of the message is Joe's and the Labour group and the independent group as well, it doesn't matter as long as the channels are there.
Bridget, could it be argued that you and Joe are two of the most powerful Lib Dems in the country now?
I doubt it.
But it is interesting, because what Richard said and what you guys have said, you do have a kind of, combined with other local, other political groups within the LGA, you do have quite a strong voice. But I wonder if you could talk a little bit maybe about the process, because I'm sure we could think of a dozen things in our case where we think, well, we'd love to be able to do that, but for some reason, some rule just not letting us. And you think of, I don't want to keep on talking about planning, but it keeps on coming up. So why can't you force developers to actually build, or something like that, or issues where you just think, well, it makes common sense. Why can't the council do that? How much is that your day-to-day, just trying to iron out these things, which just the powerlessness sometimes of local councils?
So if I give you an example of where I know we've really influenced. So I've ever since I became the leader of the council, I've sat on the District Council Network Board, which is another of these sort of sub-boards of the LGA, which represents district councils, not surprisingly enough. Now, one of the biggest threats to district councils has been local government reform, because the Conservatives would like to get rid of really irritating people like Joe and me and Richard, and forced unitarisation is a way of getting rid of most of us. So the starting point of the debate at the DCN, which again is all cross-party, was, well, it's bound to happen, so let's just try and shape it and make it as good as it can be. To which myself and the other Lib Dem colleagues went, absolutely not. This is something that threatens the whole future of our level of local government, and it is a die and a ditch matter. And so we really, really hit hard. And in the end, in a comparatively short period of time, the response that came out of District Council Network was, over our dead bodies, this is really bad news. This is the value of district councils. The government have got it majorly wrong on local government reform. So that fed into the process, and suddenly, well, not suddenly, but it's off the table in the way it was. I think they're trying to sneak it back in now with these county deals. So we'll have to have another look at that. But I think we really influenced it, because they suddenly realised that they had a fight on their hands that was a cross-party fight. So I think we actually influenced government policy on that.
It would be remiss of me not to say that what I have a problem with what you've just said is that Preston struggles, and I can use Lancashire as an example. That Preston has large assets, but is a borough still, and struggles to make that work, whereas a central Lancs unitary for us would probably work quite well. However, neighbouring Ribble Valley, which is cosy, little, doesn't want to take on the big hits of things like social care, would be probably a massive sea change in their development. Is it not the fact that should areas not be able to decide what's best for them?
Exactly. But that wasn't what was proposed. This was a top-down, let's turn us all into a sort of unified mass. And one of the major arguments about it was that as councillors, we actually represent far more people in the electorate than anywhere else in Europe. So there's already a democratic deficit, and this was going to make it all worse. And it wasn't about helping different areas, about levelling up. It was about getting rid of anyone other than Tories, quite honestly. So, absolutely, it should be down to individual areas. But, we know that with the whole unitary debate, district councils could be forced into it. Not everybody had to actually sign up to it. And that was fundamentally flawed. Very different to, combined authorities. All partners had to be prepared to sign, or the thing fell.
I suppose one of the problems is, though, you get three councils together, even if they're of the same political persuasion. And I can use again here, Labour controls South Ribble, Chorley and Preston, but the South Ribble leader might not like the Preston Labour leader and other such things. So the idea, I mean, if there's no sort of, I don't want to say top down, but if there's no kind of incentive, then probably it just won't happen. But we have kind of drifted off a little bit here. But one of the things I want to talk about, Joe, is actually about how we ensure best practice for our councillors as well, because you know what, I know, and this won't be a surprise to anyone listening or watching the podcast, is, there are some really duff councillors. There aren't enough people getting involved in politics, so the talent pool is limited. Some councillors are brilliant. In fact, most councillors are brilliant, but we've all seen those ones who turn up to a meeting, they haven't read the papers, they're just lobby fodder and just vote the way they're told. How do we improve the amount of people coming into local politics and wanting to get involved?
Yeah, I think on your first point there about best practice, I think, it's quite simple, really, just talking about it, So if, South Cambridgeshire are doing something really exciting, let's make sure that we're telling people, and regularly telling people, not just, sticking at the end of a report somewhere and it gathering dust. So regularly telling people, and that will feed into that communications plan that we want to put together. But you're right, John. Local government is not a diverse place. I mean, it really isn't. Women are woefully underrepresented on a lot of authorities. just a big shout out. At this stage, I did a panel at the ALDC conference at the weekend with our 3 fantastic new women county council leaders, and I'd argue that they're the most powerful Lib Dems in the country. Actually, looking at the sizes of their budget, but that's brilliant. You look at our parliamentarians, our MPs, that's getting better. But equally, we still really suffer from a lack of representation among black and ethnic minority groups, even LGBT groups. There's a long way to go, and I think working with the National Party, who are undertaking a diversity review, I think we can look at how we can apply that to local government, working with ALDC, try and bring people into the tent. But it's a big challenge. We have made progress, but there's still a long way to go.
I think one of the things that Lib Dems can do, though, as could theoretically members of the other groups, is to look at the abiding principles. Because interestingly, I'm looking at governance options in a unitary council in Liverpool, which is a tight-knit one, which are very similar to the ones my Liberal Democrat colleagues are looking at in Durham. It will seem different, but there will be a common set of principles which are based on our Liberal Democrat bottom-up meets top-down beliefs, but we'd interpret that differently in Liverpool than Durham. And part of our job, if I was to say what did I fail at as leader, it's getting our councillors involved properly in policy discussions like that. Our people are very tiggerish, they work very, very hard, they put in ridiculous hours, and then they're knackered to say, what are the principles of governance in Durham or Liverpool or Cambridgeshire? So somehow we have got to help people carve out time for thinking. And I think Joe or Bridget said that she went away and saw Keith House. We've all done that. But I'm bringing Amanda and her deputy to Liverpool for 2 days. And partly that is just to be challenged with things that are very, very different. But to give them time out to think about what they're seeing, rather than some officer say, oh, you've got to deal with this by 5 o'clock, leader.
And is it the fact, and Joe, Bridget, I don't mind who answers this one, we just need to hear more from you guys. I mean, not you guys personally, but your comm strategy is absolutely right. We might be doing brilliant things in this council. I think there's nearly 50 councils the Lib Dems are either in majority control or minority governance of. And actually think, well, why are they doing such a good job? Why can't a group inspire a smaller group in an area where we're not so strong? Surely that must be the biggest benefit you guys could bring.
Shall I just pick that up quickly, and then Bridget, you can come in. I think, you're right, and we need to look at the different ways we communicate. At the minute, I think the LGA group, we've got a Twitter account, and I think we've got an Instagram account, but that's sort of it. And they tend to just, there's not really any plan or strategy, I'll be honest, about the way we post. So we need to put that in place. So let's get on Facebook. We know that most people are on Facebook. Most of our councillors are probably on Facebook. Let's try and link them up. But equally, we need to work with HQ. And I think one of the key things I'm really keen to develop is that relationship between HQ and indeed the LGA group, so we can get the National Party celebrating what councillors are doing. Sorry, Bridget.
So I think we need to be fair to our predecessors. So kind of horses and water come to mind here. So there have been lots of communications going out. The LGA does masses. The Lib Dem office does masses. We've got to look at why people are not picking up the stuff that they've been getting. Are they just not interested? Do they not want to get it in the format they're getting it? Do they want to get it in a different way? Do we need to be more focused about it? So, I think we've been doing very well at the LGA over the years that I've been involved. Obviously, things have changed dramatically, and particularly with the move to, all the home working we're all doing now. We're inhabiting a different world, so I think we need to be just kind of moving on the way we communicate to people. But we can't make people listen to this stuff. We can't make them share their best practice. So I think we need to be starting with all those, is it 2,500 Lib Dem councillors or something now? Hooray! Saying to them, do you want this stuff? And if you do, what do you want? And then I think it's up to us to do the Lib Dem bottom-up bit and then respond to what they are saying to us.
Richard, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I just deal with the numbers. I mean, when I was the leader, I became the leader in 2004. We had 4,200 councillors, but don't confuse that as being the same or different than the 2,500, because since then, the number of councillors has been reduced by approximately 20%. And there's a real problem there. We're going to go through a reorganisation compulsory in Liverpool, which means we'll go to single wards of 4,500 electors, 5,500 people, roughly. In a big city like Liverpool or a big county like Durham, that puts a huge pressure on the time. Firstly, it's one of the reasons it explains the lack of diversity. Because of the time. You have to assume if you're 25, and I became a councillor when I was 22, you're going to lose money. But you're also going to assume that by 9 o'clock, our people are knackered. Do you want to come on a discussion about governance? Probably not the most exciting. So Bridget is right. We've got to find ways to do it, but we've got to find ways to do it with people who are ever increasingly pressed. And the other thing that's happened really since 2010, I now do the work a lot of work that used to be done by officers on my behalf in my ward, because there ain't the officers there now. So we're asking a small group of people, this isn't just the Lib Dems, but a small group of people to do more and more and more. And that's one of the messages we've got to take to the government, because they think you can just pop into County Hall, the town hall, go to a meeting, put your hand up and bugger off. They've no idea, and particularly no idea with respect to Joe and Bridget, what it's like in an urban area, because the Tories don't exist in big cities anywhere in the country.
But I wonder, so do you think there's a point where, I mean, no politician will ever say this out loud, but do local politicians have to be paid more? Does it have to be to get rid of that gap? Where, because I remember, like I said, I was a city councillor getting about £3,500 a year from Preston City Council. I was doing that along with a full-time job and everything else, and trying to have some sort of social life. And it wasn't until I became a county councillor as well when I was suddenly in a position where, okay, I can take a day off my work because I was now getting enough money to do it. But I had to work myself absolutely ragged to get there. And, and I'm nuts. I get that. I really enjoy campaigning. But you can see how people that they just won't do it. And so how do we stop that? How do we improve that, Joe?
I think you've got to professionalize it. I think absolutely think it is a job. It is a job, quite often. And you tell Bridget or I or Richard that being the leader of a council is not a full-time job. It is. Now, I'm very lucky that in the past few years I've been able to, not work and just do, being the leader of the council full-time. I'm very lucky that I'm in that position, but for many people, they wouldn't be. And yeah, so I think there's definitely an argument there for professionalizing it, making it a profession, if you like. And I think if we do move to unitaries and we see councils getting bigger, workloads getting bigger, just the size of what councils do growing, then absolutely, I think the argument's going to be there even more so. So yeah, I really think as well we need to look at it's outrageous. I think that councillors are entitled to pensions. I think David Cameron sort of stripped council of that ability. So yeah, I think the current system, it's no wonder we've got a load of, sorry to say it, but, white middle-aged men, all over the place. The system makes that happen. So yeah, until we reform it, we're always going to get wealthier retired people.
And actually, we're probably not diverse in a sense in this one, not in the ways you've talked about before, but also, I mean, Richard said he was elected in 22. I was elected at 27. Joe, I think you were 12 when you got elected. But we were all, if you look at, certainly my time on any councils, the amount of people under pension age that then re-seek election is dire, is so down, because the pressure and the pressures and mindset sometimes on working age councillors is horrendous. And to the point where everything we've just talked about, they just can't continue, and you just think, because particularly, like I say, when I was Preston City Council, when I was just a Preston City Councillor, if I was to work out my hourly rate, it would be pennies. based on the time of it. And that's not why we do it. You know, if Lib Dems, if we were interested in money and power, we probably wouldn't be we probably wouldn't be Lib Dems. But we've got to overcome that, haven't we, Bridget? Otherwise, how do we ever get better councillors?
Well, exactly, John. But it's not, the money's obviously a factor, and the hideous time commitment. But it's a tough job, and I think I'm going to be sitting on a board with the LGA looking at. I think they're calling it civility in public life. But actually, that's a very nice way of phrasing what is, the kind of daily abuse and attacks that people in our position are subjected to. And, we've had a council leader with a car firebombed recently. We've had another council leader attacked on a doorstep. Another leader was telling me that it's a weekly occurrence that dog poo is put through his letterbox. I don't do Facebook now because I just, it's just not good for me reading all that trolling. I'm hanging in with Twitter at the moment, though, when I open it up every morning, I kind of brace myself for the abuse. That we're taking it, MPs are taking it. I think we get it worse, and I think actually we are more vulnerable because we're very accessible to all sorts of people. Everyone knows where I live. My address is everywhere. So it's got to become a more attractive job, and this is really not helping. Again, I think coming back to the LGA, I'm hopeful that the LGA are going to be taking a very, very strong leadership role in pushing for major improvements in this, better engagement of the police, but also the fact that some of the worst behaviour we're seeing in our most senior politicians. So if they're behaving really badly, it makes them fair game. Therefore, we all become fair game as well. And it's just not on. You've got to be very, very thick-skinned in order to do the job we do.
I remember there was a Tory councillor in Preston who actually was very, very good, and she just couldn't take any sort of abuse. We have a very left-wing, kind of rough Labour-run council, and she just couldn't handle it. And she was actually very good at what she did, and she just said she just couldn't. But when you get things like Priti Patel, who was admonished for bullying civil servants, and then there was no punishment about that, I don't expect you guys to have the answers to this, but how do we start that process? Because I love being a councillor. I genuinely love it. I love going on the street, and what you described, Bridget, was horrendous. All those things happening. But 99.9% of the time, people are amazing on the doors, and generally, if you're ever getting sick of politicians in Westminster, go spend an hour knocking on your residents' doors, and you'll realise actually the meaning of why you do what you do. But are we? Is that changing, Joe? Are we entering a new type of politics?
Yeah, well, I think it's got a lot worse since with the advent of social media. I think Bridget's right. I haven't come off Facebook, but I don't have the notifications on anymore. And when I post something, I certainly don't read the comments. I think, it'd be bad for your health. So has it got worse? Yeah, it probably has. It's probably, been accelerated by social media. But as we've just said, it's the whole issue around, when people see Donald Trump and Boris Johnson and Priti Patel, saying things, it normalises it, unfortunately. And I've been a councillor now for 10 years. I noticed it after Brexit and Donald Trump and the vitriol and everything that sort of spewed out of that. It has got worse since then. How do we try and improve it? Well, I think we try where we can. We call it out. We can't go through every comment and police that. But I think there needs to be a way of calling it out. Where they're not. I think actually internally, I think advice for our councillors is probably a good place to start. I really do. So, like Bridget and I were saying, we don't go on it or we don't check it. So I think a bit of advice on how to cope with it, and then how we then deal with the more serious instances, and actually having some accountability. So if somebody does say something threatening or very unpleasant, there is actually some. There's some justice and there's some retribution, because if these things go unpunished, then they're going to continue to happen. I think what I would say as well is quite often it's not actually the really nasty ones that upset me. It's just the little jabs and the little things here and there. You think, God, why do I bother? Why do I win? So it's really hard. And of course, Bridget said, you do have to have thick skin. We know, any public figure, there's an element of having to have a bit of a thick skin, but there's a line, isn't there, between what is acceptable and what's not? And I think it's a tricky one. So yes, I've talked around that a little bit there, John. But you can see my thought process.
And I think you're right, Joe, that we've got to call out bad behaviour. Coincidentally, about 3 hours ago, I put in a complaint to our monitoring officer about the behaviour and a subsequent email from a long-serving councillor from another party than mine. And it all happened while we were discussing the new code of conduct. Could you make it up? This is Liverpool. You know it must be true. But I do think that we must call out bad behaviour. And I put in mind, I've been getting these crap emails for years, and I haven't done anything about it. But it only occurred to me last night that I don't care what he says about me, but the effect that similar emails might have on a junior officer, I accept I should have done something about it a long time ago. Then the other thing we can do is to rise above it. Now, we used to have a raging bull mayor called Joe Anderson, and he was incredibly aggressive. And the worst way we could have responded to him was being aggressive. What we did was take the piss out of him, and he couldn't take that at all. Nothing shut him up than the fact he was the butt of a joke that we introduced in the council chamber about it. I won't tell you the story of why his nickname in Liverpool is Chippy Tits, but we'll...
But the problem I have, I'm going to let Joe and Bridget talk about what they want to see going forward and their future vision for the LGA as well. But the problem we have, and I don't know if many people know, is that there's very little recourse against bad behaving councillors, really. I have a trans councillor in my group, and the abuse they get from other politicians is absolutely appalling. And there's nothing you can do. So you're in a position where, do you then put court of public opinion on them, of which point that's the attention they want? And this is the difficulty, because you talk about Trump, and they love the attention. They love the outrage because they feel like it justifies their obnoxious opinions. So you either swallow it and shut up, or you go back at them, not in an aggressive way, but go back at them, and they give them the attention they want. At which point you kind of feel like you lose both ways. So I'd love to know how you think you can get over that kind of situation.
I think we've got to get to the point where we call it all out. So, as a woman leader, I've worked in universities, health service, and education, and in voluntary sector, and I'd never really experienced misogyny until I came into politics. And it's alive and kicking. It's not in our party, I hasten to add. And you end up with your tolerance level going up and up. And it's only, I went and had to speak to some young women quite recently, and the subject came up, and I was saying to them, no, you've got to call it out every time. And then I thought, you're not doing that, Bridget. You've got to start practicing what you preach. So I had to sort of give myself a bit of a talking to. And we had some particularly difficult men in Cambridgeshire, and we've just got to get better at doing it. And okay, we sound like a broken record, but until we start doing that, there's going to be no impact.
John, can I just add to that as well? Actually, it's horrible for the person suffering the abuse or the jibes or whatever. Actually, in my case, it's my family I feel more sorry for. If my mum sees comments, it's a relatively small community. She then gets upset. She then fires off, and I think, oh God, equally, I know other councillors where it's affected marriages. I know one of our councillors where somebody was writing to his wife, telling her he was having an affair. So it's sort of like, just disgruntled. That is the level. So it's the families and friends it affects as well. So yeah, it's a really tricky issue. And on the LGA, I look forward to Bridget in particular and the team sort of cracking on tackling.
Well, let's. I want to listen. We're going to end the podcast on positive notes. So let's hope, actually, with the work that all groups will hopefully do with the LGA, once you get more people involved in local politics, you can get rid of the irritating loudmouths that are in all parties sometimes, and actually, because what the moment is they've got so few people to replace them, and that's on all parties. We struggle to find candidates, and that's us, Tories, Labour, whomever, and so you get stuck with some like Burke. You think, how has he been a councillor for several decades? But let's talk about you guys in the future. So big send-off, Joe. What do you want to see the LGA? What is it we can look forward to from the next few years of your I was going to say your rule, but that makes it sound like you're like on the Iron Throne or something like that. But your tenure as leader.
Yeah, I think my colleagues would have something to say about that. I have to say. No, I think. Yeah, first looking at the Lib Dem LGA group, well, it's the themes that we've been talking about. So that better communication, as Bridget and Richard have said, how we can try and get to people if they want to listen. Of course, how we can continue. Alan Conant, in particular, as our lead peer, does brilliant work supporting our councillors up and down the land. How we can continue to do that, and hopefully do even more. That other point about how we can try and improve representation, and the point we were just talking about, encourage people to stand as Lib Dem councillors as well. I think, in terms of the LGA's work more generally on those policy issues, well, clearly we've got the social care issue at the minute. I mean, the announcement yesterday was so woeful in that it dealt with part of the funding issue, certainly not long term, but it didn't really talk about any of the other issues, the staffing crisis, etc., etc., etc. Equally, we've nearly gone through a podcast without mentioning Brexit, so I'm going to mention it. We've got the effects of Brexit, we've got the effects of the pandemic, we've got a whole host of problems that were issues before both Brexit and the pandemic, which are still outstanding, whether that's on housing, the climate emergency, etc. And then, of course, we've got the issues of Brexit and the pandemic and the fallout from those, and that's going to be a big task for local government to step up and try and fill the gap. So those are my aspirations and what I hope we can get stuck into and try and deal with.
Bridget, anything to add?
Well, this morning I thought my job was to supply Joe with pens when he came to meetings. I think it's probably bigger than that. So, what I'm really interested in is making sure that the things that Joe and I believe are the priorities for all the other Lib Dem councillors are actually their priorities, and they're the things that they really want us pushing our liberal values, into government policy. So we've got planning, we've got finance, which of course is a ongoing nightmare, the local government reform, and the whole sort of COVID recovery. What's our responsibilities going to be with these million people suffering from long COVID at the moment? Making sure that our role is to really put people and what people want and need at the forefront of what we're saying. But as Joe's mentioned, really making sure that people are aware, our councillors are aware of the value of the local government. Everybody feels part of the local government association family, because that's what it is, and that they realise that Joe and I and all our members who are on all the various boards and so on are there. Both not just to feed information back to them, but to take what they want back into board level and to local government association level.
Richard, as former leader, as always on the podcast, you get the last word.
Can we all find ways, whether that's locally or nationally, of having more fun? I've really loved going to work with the Durham group on Saturday. Lovely people. You wouldn't think we were dealing with serious things. We were laughing the whole time, but we were laughing with each other, not at each other, and we had a good time. And then to pick up the point that you made, John, my batteries have been really recharged over the last 3 days, because I've been collecting stuff. And if I just move this, you can see behind me my front room. Now, my front room doesn't usually look that bad, but I invited people to bring... Thank you, John. I invited people to bring me stuff for our Afghan refugees, and that's just half of it. We've already taken a load of that. But the good thing about that is the people who've come to my door and the conversations we've had and the delight I've had talking to people of similar views to my own, to our own, and also getting about 20 of them as new Connect contacts, which you didn't have before. But that's not why I did it. But go out into your ward and knock on some doors. And if it's not an election, doesn't matter. Good to see you. Oh, we don't usually get people like so fun and recharge your batteries. So how you going to do that from London is now your concern, not mine.
Thank you, Richard. And I just want to thank Joe and Bridget so much for coming on. Really important. And like I said, I no doubt we'll probably get you on the podcast numerous times. I've actually talked to some of the subgroups in the LJ as well, whether that's dealing with all the various issues, about them coming on, talking about their brief. Let's try and promote some of the great work we do as part of the Lib Dem local government family. But I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much to everyone who's tuned in, either listening to us as a podcast or watching us on Facebook and YouTube. We really appreciate you. Do make sure you like and subscribe to the podcast. You can follow everything to do with the podcast at LibDem Pod. Do check all these guys out on their social media. I'll make sure there's links in the show notes. But thank you so much for watching. And we've got a whole host of brilliant episodes coming up, so make sure you subscribe. Thank you very much.